Hey guys, Infidel1258 here. Today I want to talk to you about the energy distribution system within Splinterlands. If you don't know, within the Splinterlands, which is a blockchain-based video game where you receive non-fungible tokens and cryptocurrency rewards for your time and attention, you actually have to get you're only allowed to play so many times within any one of the leagues, and there's different structures and ways that the amount of playtime is allotted to you. But the energy system is the primary focus for that. If I want to join a battle within the Modern League, I only get 25 energy a day after a 24-hour window, and one comes every hour-ish. And so that's all I can play unless I want to buy more. But should there be a better mechanism? Because if people who have $1 invested in this game get that amount, and people who have $1 million invested get that amount, does this structure make sense? Let's talk about it today. If that sounds interesting, stick around. Otherwise, check out the next video. So this conversation comes from a comment from my comment section where Pompey72 dropped in a thought on a recent video where I was talking with Tails about the highest level rewards in the game of Splinterlands. Some people feel that they are not, let's say, not effectively being rewarded at the lowest league levels maybe, and perhaps too much rewards are being paid to the highest leagues. That's a separate conversation. But the energy distribution, meaning how often you can play the game, is something that affects, I want to say theoretically, everyone equally. People with big budgets can buy energy, and that's maybe a separate conversation. Maybe the pricing around energy should be rethought. I've already said probably we shouldn't sell energy for Glint. We probably should just sell it for DEC, but that's almost a separate conversation. Today, I just want to talk about this question from Pomp, where he says, energy needs to be distributed to players based on their collection power and not on a per spellbook level. Every energy should also be different for the modes. Wild energy, modern energy, energy should be a tradable token. These are interesting thoughts that I've never heard before, and that's where we're going to spend the rest of the video. So again, if that sounds interesting, stick around. Okay, let's go item by item. Energy needs to be distributed to players based on their collection power. If you don't know, collection power is, or CP, is the metric of, it was a way that we used to track within the game of Splinterlands, sort of how invested you were within the game. And there were certain moments or places within the game you could only enter once you had X amount of collection power. It was a threshold you had to meet to satisfy in order to enter into certain tournaments or to play at certain league levels. And we've kind of pulled back from that whole model, yet every card still has a collection power. If you go into your cards within Splinterlands and you just click on any one of your cards, they're all going to have a specific collection power number. The power number for this card is 17,325. It's a max level. It's a max level legendary beta summoner. I think it's a beta, it might be a promo. Anyways, this card's 17,325 power. And that power refers to the CP. And so he's saying, and you can, if you want to look at this another way, you come into Peak Monsters, you go to My Cards, and you can actually see the collection power for Infidel1258 set is 5,708,539 collection power. And that collection power is what he's referring to. So it doesn't necessarily, it's like one, you could look at US dollar valuation of your cards, but it's another way to sort of say you're X invested into the game. The USD value can be in some ways reliable too, maybe, but US dollars fluctuate. Every card that's sold or opened from a pack always has a specific amount of collection power. Older cards have greater, newer cards have less, but the CP associated with your account speaks to some amount of your investment within the game. And so, saying all that, I would argue, I see some merit to this, but I don't necessarily think I agree with the suggestion that this should be the metric by which we distribute the energy. And yet, while I, on the surface, would disagree with it, I think it's an interesting suggestion which I've not heard someone say before, and it seems to strive toward acknowledging those who have invested greater within the game of Splinterlands. And every way that my mind gets to, that the ways in which that I try to understand the value proposition of what Splinterlands even is, they always come back to that logic, that processing always comes back to, if this game is going to be fun and rewarding, it has to be the rewards have to be to some extent commensurate with your investment in the game. If there is no logical connection between return and investment in the game of Splinterlands, then there is no logical pathway to financial reward through the game. I'm going to try and say that in a slightly different way to make sure it's clear. There has to be some connection between how much you put in and how much you get out of it. There has to be. Otherwise, it's luck. Otherwise, there's no predictability towards it. Otherwise, there's no financial reason why one would risk value on it in order to receive an unknown, unfathomable, unpredictable reward. There's some amount of predictability between what you've put in and what you're going to get, and that has to be held up. Now, we've tried to reach that sort of theoretical threshold of logical connection between investment and return in many ways, I would say. But this would be a new way, a new and creative way that I don't know if I agree with or if I stand behind. And but I'll say one positive thing about it before we move to point number 2. If collection power were the basis for determining energy production on your account on any given day, what you would ultimately be incentivizing is ownership of more cards. And pointing back to the past, when collection power mattered with respect to the threshold of league level you could play in, that used to be the thing. You could only get the gold if you had 1 million CP or whatever it was. What happened in that world? People rented cards that they didn't even need. Maybe they didn't even want, or that they wouldn't even play with, strictly to bump up their CP. It was like a fighter eating a cheeseburger during, right before the weigh-in, because they actually need to put on LBs. Like you need to weigh more to be able to fight the match. And so you just cramming in CP however you can. And so people would rent the cheapest cards that were totally worthless otherwise, had no value, no utility, no functionality, except they were helping you meet that criteria. And I believe, while again, I don't agree with Pompey's theory that this would be maybe net positive, I have to say, and I think if you're following the logic, his suggestion would, for those who are interested in playing at the highest league levels, this would translate to they would want to rent more cards. Even people that like the highest of the high in this game. You come into rank, you can see who they are. Season activity, and you go leaderboard. The best of the best players in Modern Champion League, Lorcas, Kezran, Hanvi, these guys would themselves want to rent more cards probably, because we would be talking about creating more energy through more card ownership or control. Rentals are a way to control cards in this game. And so you can imagine they would want that extra energy because they want those extra battles, because they want the meaningful rewards from the leaderboard, and therefore they would rent. Now, that would draw up card prices. If we made rentals more valuable, more desirable, that would make cards more valuable and more desirable. Prices would go up, and that might, that's a strong reason to agree with a thinking like Pompey. I don't know if it would be net positive, but I think that's an interesting conversation, and I'm going to leave it at that. I want to move on to point number 2. He says energy should be different for the modes, wild energy, modern energy. I kind of don't know why it isn't. So on point number 1, I can see his logic. I don't know if I agree. I'd want to think about it more. I'm going to be reading your guys' comments on point number 1. But point number 2, I think I'm in full agreement. Why don't we have energy in wild and energy in modern? And I wouldn't say, I'm not saying give us double energy in the sense that, hey, you give me 50 energy a day and I can use it in wild or in modern. I think I have a wild energy pool and I have a modern energy pool. And I think part of the reason why they would say no to this is because there's only so much SPS to hand out in either of these leagues. And they don't want to... It's part of the game within the game of Splinterlands is that the players have to decide which pot they want to fight for, which league they want to participate in, and they can't do it all unless they buy energy. And so I think that's a bit of the thinking behind it. But here's like I've said so many times, all complicated problems have complicated solutions, and there's no solution that's going to be satisfying to every single party. But here's the other side of the coin that I think we maybe aren't looking at, or we should consider. It's don't we want players who love this game to come and be here as often as possible? I mean, I find it shocking that the game is designed in a way where people can come and satisfy their energy commitment, or let's say their access to the game with almost no personal investment. I'm talking about XBot. You turn on XBot, pay your 10 or 20% of your SPS rewards to the bot, buy a wild season pass, and walk away. And there's nothing you need to do, and your energy is all going to get eaten. And yet, doesn't it make more sense to almost say to every player that exists in this game that are still attending to this game, Splinterlands, that we love, look, that's a thing that's available to you. But by the way, Modern's also available to you. And by the way, we want you to play in Modern. And by the way, we want to sell new packs to you within the Conclave or the Rebellion set or the next set to come. Because those things are primarily used in Modern. And so we want to create every reason to incentivize them to stick around and play in that. What if we said to them, look, you get this energy in Modern, you can only use it in Modern? I think that seems to bode well to me. I think that would draw more. There would be an audience of people that would be invested, that would almost feel pot committed to chase after some of that. Maybe it would mean they're only playing in the lowest leagues of Modern. But I think it would bring more players to Modern, and it would probably bring more players to Wild also. I think that's true. That pro, because that would be a pro, has to be weighed against the negative I already said. The con of the SPS reward pools are only so big. And do we want to divert some of that payout to some of these players who otherwise might not play? I don't know. It's an interesting conversation. And finally, he says, energy should be a tradable token. That is a very interesting theory, which I've never, ever heard anybody say in 3 years of there being an... How long has there been an energy system? Has there always been an energy system? Did we used to have energy? See, it's been so long. I've been playing this game for 6 years now, I think. 6.5 years. No, we didn't used to have energy. You just played... You had a daily quest that you wanted to beat. And it took me like 5 battles to do that. At some point, we introduced the energy system. And it hasn't always existed. And despite that being like probably at least 2021 or 2020, 5 years of energy system, 4 years, 5 years, I've never heard anyone suggest this. And I would like to say, I'm intrigued. If there was an energy system that allowed you to trade your tokens, here's the predictable result of that. You would see people create new accounts. For $10, they would create a spellbook account, and then they would receive X amount of energy per turn per day because of that account, and then they would trade that for whatever value it would go for. And there would be a huge saturation of available energy, and they would be seeking after whatever reward they could get. So energy would sell for very little. Having said that, there would be seasons where huge demand happens to Splinterlands. I argue that season is coming when SPS moves with bull markets during an altcoin season, which many will doubt is ever going to happen again, but I don't. I believe will happen again. And if SPS goes into a bull run and goes 10x or 20x where it's currently located, you will see thousands and thousands and thousands of people rush toward the game. And then the unintended consequence of what he's describing would be this. Energy will be dirt cheap in bear markets and crazy expensive in bull markets. And maybe that's okay, and maybe that's not. I would argue that if this idea was going to be feasible at all, it would need to be tied together with something like this, where your energy level or your energy output is linked to how much investment within the game you have access to. All this to say, and let's finish here, the energy system within Splinterlands can and should be reviewed. It hasn't always existed in its current iteration, and it doesn't always need to exist in its current iteration. And it's not a perfect system. It never has been, and it never will be. So let's talk about this meaningfully as a community and try and find improvements. Maybe it does need to be linked towards how much I don't think US dollar valuation makes any sense because it's too variable, but maybe collection power does make sense. We still use that feature in some respects. Like it's essentially a factor within how our airdrops pay out within the Conclave or the Rebellion Mage Wagon payouts. And so we still have this data, we still have this variable, this mechanism by which we calculate. And so maybe it should factor in. As I said, that would bring some interesting consequences toward card ownership, maybe the rental market, valuations on card pricing. But I think simply you could not do the energy as a tradable token unless it was more linked towards your financial investment within the game. Is that something you'd ever want to see? Let me know in the comments below. Have an amazing day. God bless.